If somebody had told me that this story was a real life story, I would probably think it's one of these classic Hollywood movie. So this Congolese man sent some hitmen to unalive his own wife. Now the story started in Burundi and then it ended in Australia. But the hitmen showed mercy because they still have good conscience within them and they saved this woman. Now, if you like this type of story, don't forget to follow our social channels and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Share this video and drop your comment at the end of the video. So this story started in Burundi, like I said. You know Burundi, that small country in Africa, in East Africa specifically, beautiful people with troubled history. Now, a woman by the name Noela Rukundo, a mother of 5 children already, packed her bags and ran away from the chaos that was happening in Burundi in 2004. She carried her 5 children on her back. I mean, not literally, but you know what I mean. Now, she arrived in Melbourne, Australia. Fresh start, a new country, cold weather, different people. So she landed in this resettlement agency. You know what, this government resettlement agency that help refugees that ran away from their country to settle in that country. So they were helping this woman to settle down in Australia. Now, right there at that resettlement agency, who does she meet? She met a very tall, fine Congolese man by name Balenga Kalala. Now, this man had also suffered though. In fact, it was even the chaos that was happening in Congo that chased this man away from his own country. The rebels in that country had unalived his wife and his child, so he had no choice but to run away from the country. They connected through a social worker and he was helping to serve as interpreter between the resettlement agency and this woman, because this woman obviously she couldn't speak a very good English very well, but she was very good in Swahili. So this Congolese man was like an interpreter between the social worker and this lady. One thing leads to another. They both fell in love. In fact, they moved together in a suburb called Kings Park in Melbourne. They got married. They had 3 more children together. 8 children in total in that house. From the outside, the family was a goal. It was like a story of African love in Australia. Refugees love story. Very beautiful. The kind of story that you will hear and you will want to fall in love with people. Somewhere around 2014, something shifted inside this guy. He started suspecting, no, not like he confirmed anything, like he started suspecting his wife Noela of cheating on him. Now, there was no evidence, there was no proof that his wife was actually cheating on him. It was just like devil whispering in his ear. And instead of him sitting down with his wife like a man to discuss the whole issue with her, like telling the wife like, hey, I have a concern that something is happening in our marriage. Instead of him sitting down like a man with his wife to iron the issue out, this man went to the internet or wherever people find this type of thing. He hired hitmen. Yes, hitmen in Africa, not even in Australia, to unalive his own wife. He paid 7,000 Australian dollars to these people simply because of assumption. And this man was really serious about this whole thing. So in January 2015, Noela's stepmother, the last person that she called mother or called mama, passed away in Burundi. Noela was so broken, she had to fly back home to go and mourn the demise of her stepmother. She was in her hotel room in Bujumbura, tired and grieving and emotionally shattered after the whole funeral was done. And then her phone rings. It was Balenga, her husband, calling all the way from Australia. He speaks so softly, he is gentle. He says, my love, how are you doing? How are you okay? Why don't you just go outside and get some fresh air? You know, the night breeze will calm you down. You know, he was so caring, and obviously, you know how nature have a way of calming you down. So she believed the husband and she actually walked outside the hotel room. But the moment her feet touches the pavement outside of her room, 4 armed men appeared from nowhere and then they pressed a gun on the back of her neck and whispered, don't scream. If you scream, we will shoot you, and by the time they find out or they catch us, you will already be gone. Noela's heart stopped working at that time. She doesn't even know, like her heart froze at that moment. They forced her into a car and drove her into the darkness. So they took Noela into a building, some kind of warehouse, and tied her to a chair, blindfolded. The hands were bound, and then they left her alone with some 4 armed strangers. And then one of the men looked at her and asked, what did you do? What kind of problem do you have with somebody? Because a man paid us very, very good money, in fact heavily, to come and unalive you. And Noela was confused and terrified at the same time. And then she said, which man? I don't have any problem with anybody. The gunman just smiled. He picked up his phone. He called the person who had hired them. In the conversation, he said, "We have her." And Noela heard a voice that she recognized in that phone call between that man and the person that had paid them to unalive her. A voice that she had known for 10 years, and a voice that she said "I do" to on their wedding day. And that was Balenga's voice, her husband in Australia. And Balenga said, as cold as I, unalive her immediately. When Noela heard that voice on the phone call and she knew that this was the voice of her husband, she just passed out. And by the time Noela woke up, the men were still there, right there with her. But something had changed. One of them spoke, "We are not going to unalive you." And Noela blinked like, "What?" And then they said to this woman, "We don't unalive women. We don't even unalive children. That is our golden rule." It turned out that one of the hitmen knew Noela's brother. So these men, these armed, dangerous men who were paid to end her life, instead, they called Balenga and told Balenga, her husband, that the price has increased now, that the man should add more money to what he already paid them. In fact, they should add extra $3,400 so that they can finish the job smoothly. And guess what? Balenga paid. He paid them the money and they collected the money from him. They kept her locked up for 2 more days. After that 2 days, they drop her off on the side of the road somewhere, alive and healthy. But before they let her go, they handed her an envelope. Inside that envelope, there was a recorded phone conversation between Balenga, her husband, and the hitmen when they were planning for her murder. And then there were some receipts of the money that this man sent to them, because it was a wire transfer. So there was those receipts in that conversation. And then they told her, "You have 80 hours to leave this country because your husband is very serious about unaliving you, and we can't, even though we can spare you, but others may not be able to spare you, because if this man hear that you are still alive, he's not going to be happy, and he's trying all his best to make sure you are not alive. So you must leave this country as soon as possible. In fact, run with your 2 legs as fast as your 2 legs can carry." Meanwhile, back in Melbourne, Balenga Kalala had told everyone that his wife passed away, that his wife had some sort of accident back home in Burundi and that she passed away. And then this man was crying with tears coming out from his eyes and then accepting condolences from people. Even African people, African community in Melbourne, they visited him. They brought food. They wept for Noela, whom they have known for a very long time, thinking that she was truly gone. But in February 22, 2015, Noela Rukundo, who had contacted the Kenya and the Benga embassy to arrange her escape, who had called her pastor in Melbourne in the middle of the night, quietly flew back to Australia without the husband knowing. In fact, she arrived at her house in the evening. She sat in a parked car across the street just watching what is going on in her house. And then she watched through the window as the last group of mourners said their goodbye to her grieving husband. And then they walked to their car and drove away. She just waited in the car, watching everything that is unfolding before her eyes. And then she watched Balenga, her husband, escort them outside. And then right there, she stepped out of her car and walked towards him. Balenga looked up in surprise and shock, in great shock. He froze. His hand went into his head. In fact, his eyes were wide open, like, you know how you see a ghost, like, you know how you see someone who is supposed to be dead and then you don't know if this is their ghost or something. He started walking towards her slowly, like a man walking on a broken glass. He even had to reach out and touch her shoulder to be sure that this was real, this was not a ghost. And Noela Rukundo looked at her husband in her eyes and said, "Surprise, I'm still alive, I'm alive." Balenga screamed. He said, I'm sorry for everything." And Noela just looked at this man calmly. And she pulled out her phone and then called the police right there. So the police came right there. And you know what was even crazy? Balenga denied everything. But then the officers played him the record, his own voice, his planning, him saying unalive her, the payments, the history, and everything that he has planned. They gave it to him. They showed it to his face right there. And then Balenga began to cry crocodile tears. "Oh, I'm very sorry. Sometimes it was the devil that used me. I didn't mean to do this to her. It was the devil." And then on December 11, 2015, Balenga Kalala was sentenced to 9 years in prison for incitement to murder. Another story, story, story.